Okay, this is a video to do with what we're doing is I'm just going over the level 2 mechanics, and this equation that you use, V equals d over t, this one here is only used for constant speed, okay, this one, and or for average speed. And however, if you have a question where something is starting from rest or coming to stop, that means the speed is no longer constant, and so you have to use these kinematic equations, okay? And that's what we use. And there are 4 of these equations, but there's actually 5 quantities. So VF stands for final velocity, initial velocity, acceleration time, and D stands for displacement. Okay, now because these are vectors, you need to take direction into account, and sometimes there are these hidden numbers. So the value for acceleration depends on the type of acceleration. So if something is going horizontally, for horizontally, your acceleration could be anything. Okay, so it's like a car going on a road or something like that, or billiard balls. But if something is falling freely under gravity, that is your projectile motion, then your value for A becomes negative 9.8 meters per second squared. Now, the reason why I've used negative is because the way that I've taught my classes is that I use positive for anything going upwards. Anything in the upward direction as take as positive, and I use negative for anything going in the downward direction. And because gravity always acts downwards, anything that you throw up will always accelerate downwards. Okay, and that's how you solve those questions. And this kinematic equation is used for, yes, horizontal movement, and also for free fall under gravity, and also for projectile motion. But in order to understand projectile motion, you need to know about vectors. Now, vectors are quantities with both size and direction. And the way that a vector is denoted is vectors are drawn using arrows. Okay, the direction of the arrow tells you the direction of the vector, and the size or the length of the arrow tells you the size of the vector. Okay, so some of the things that you need to know about vectors is how do you add vectors? Now, the thing is, vectors are added head to tail. And so if you've got 2 vectors, let's say this is vector A, and then you've got to add it to vector B. And if they're both in the same direction, the way that you add this is vector A, and then you add them head to tail. This is vector B, and the resultant vector goes from start to finish. So that is the length of the resultant. So that's for addition of vectors. Now, they can also have vectors going in opposite direction. So you could have vector A plus, and you could have vector B, which is in the opposite direction. And I'll just make vector A a bit longer, so they're both slightly different sizes. And the way you get this answer is, so this is your vector A, and then your vector B is in the opposite direction. So because you're adding them head to tail, what you actually have to do is find their difference. So the resultant goes from start to finish, and that is your resultant vector, what I've drawn in black, this little thing here. Okay. And then you could also have vectors which are not 180 degrees opposite. So you could have them like 90 degrees opposite each other. So you've got vector A plus vector B. Let's say it's coming downwards. This is kind of what you use for projectile motion, could be going up or down. And the way that you add these ones here is again head to tail. So you've got vector A, and then you got vector B, And the resultant, we started with the red end. So the resultant goes from start to finish, and that is your resultant. So where do you use this sort of thing? So this is used for projectile motion. Okay, so in projectile motion, if you have to find the velocity with which something lands on the ground, it's moving with constant, it's going with constant horizontal velocity, so that is constant, and it's moving with accelerated vertical velocity. So that's how you do that one. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is you also need to know how to subtract vectors. And so that was addition of vectors when you add them head to tail. So subtraction of vectors, and the rule is you add the opposite. So what is the meaning of add the opposite? So add the opposite simply means, let's say you've got vector A, which is here, and then you've got to subtract vector B. Let's say it's in the same direction. So what you do theoretically is vector A stays as it is, but where you have the minus sign, you put a plus. The arrow pointing to the right will now point to the left, and now you just do your usual vector addition, which is A going this way and B going the other way. Now, because they're in opposite direction, your resultant will be from start to finish. This is your resultant vector. Okay, so opposite is 180 degrees opposite. That's the meaning of add the opposite. The first one stays the same, okay, but it is the second one where you have to flip the arrow. And how do we get a new page? Okay, I'll just stop till